after several years of highly public disputes, the University of Minnesota and Fairview Health Services have reached a new 10-year agreement that preserves their academic health partnership and avoids a potentially disruptive split. Here to talk all about it is the Star Tribune health reporter, Chris Snowbeck. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thanks for all your reporting on this Fairview merger. I know it's been going on for several years. I mean, they joined together back in the 90s, and we've just been following this dispute the last several years. It looks like they finally have a deal. Get us up to speed.
Yeah, so this is important for funding the medical school, for funding the academic health program over at the university. So that would be, the training of physicians for sure, but also kind of high-end specialty care at the U, and then also, cutting edge research. So this is Fairview since 1997 has owned the teaching hospital at the university. The teaching hospital is really central to all of those things, the care, the teaching, and the research. And so this has been a long-standing discussion about, how the clinical partner, they call it, Fairview, the extent to which it can provide financial support and other operating support, basically, for all the things that the U Health system does. So this is the latest deal that kind of spells all that out.
And now, I know you brought up the medical school. Research was also a big deal. What will happen to the research arm of this health system?
Yeah, I mean, everybody is sending pretty much of a status quo kind of message, like that this agreement will let things keep going as they've been going. The question mark, I think, is the financial terms change. There's more of a question mark about exactly how much money Fairview will be providing going forward. Obviously, if it would be less, there would be impacts. I don't know precisely if that would be research or teaching or exactly how they would do that. But for right now, everybody is sending, pretty positive messages that there won't be big changes. I mean, the thing to watch is that starting next year, a chunk of the money, as it were, is going to depend on the financial performance and of the Fairview system. Depending on how well they do, that will drive kind of how much support they can provide. And a lot of hospitals right now are talking about, trouble. So it's kind of a wait and see, I think, to see exactly how it plays out.
You say it's positive now, but it has been quite contentious. How did we get from that to now this?
Yeah, it took a long time. I think I think meetings that none of us are allowed to go to, I think, have been probably pretty intense. I think, every now and then we'll get glimpses into some of the infighting, really. There was an episode a couple of years ago where, Fairview requested relief, basically said, look, with COVID, we've got big financial challenges. We can't provide as much money. And asked the university, can you help us out here? They did. They said the answer is basically no. And so there's friction over things like that. There also was friction because Fairview wanted to merge with Sanford Health a couple of years ago. The university opposed that plan. So those are the sorts of tensions that have come out. And really, I think both of those episodes were in 2022 and 2023. And I think that did kind of set up a pretty contentious negotiation where I think both sides were probably really questioning, is there a different way forward?
You said in your reporting that each side depends on the other for its success. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they run up against is that at the highest level, I mean, I'm not sure that there is another health system locally that wants to provide the financial support and support otherwise that Fairview provides to the university. I mean, it's a significant investment. And conversely, Fairview gets real reputational benefits and reputational, but the breadth of services by virtue of being in partnership with the university. There are unique services, kind of marquee services that make Fairview different. And so both have real advantages by virtue of this partnership. And also the alternative of going without this partnership is I'm not exactly sure that either has a ton of options, or certainly not easy options. And the last point I just make on it, and boy, this gets into really weedy, boring stuff, but like there's just a huge amount of just kind of day-to-day operational stuff where the two organizations really work together closely, particularly at the very large university hospital right here in Minneapolis. Like unscrambling the egg, I think would be really difficult.
Yeah, makes sense. The deal also brings with it plenty of changes that create more distance. I know that you're talking about how much they depend on each other, but it will create more distance between the partners in things like the hospital names. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So again, when I mentioned earlier about, Fairview when it asked for help on the finances, part of the background there was that back in 2019 they started providing more money. And with that provision of funding, there was this new thing, M Health Fairview, and that was a new brand. And so um, they really behind that brand there was not only just money but also just a real attempt to bring the two organizations more closely together, particularly with the university doctors throughout like the Fairview system, because Fairview has hospitals and clinics all over the metro in particular. So there was a big effort and the brand really did signify kind of an attempt for them to work more closely together. Um, that brand, M Health Fairview, is going to go away. And that is going to signify a bunch of weedy things in the background where they're just a little further apart. Um, I think some of it remains to be seen, like on the ground, what that looks like, because there's sort of a level at the top of the organization of negotiation, but then again, when you think of a place like the University Hospital over in Minneapolis, I mean, with the on the ground stuff is so interrelated. I'm not exactly sure how much more distance there will be at that level, but certainly at the top, they're going to be further apart. When you look at things like board of directors seats, for example, the university has had seats on the board at Fairview, and they won't anymore.
Interesting. So it might be too early to ask, but I'm going to ask anyway. What impact does this have on patients?
Yeah, I don't think it should. I mean, I think, this is a lot of kind of financial and power stuff, a lot of it, that is really more about the future and therefore maybe future impacts. But boy, I don't think right now I don't think there's any reason for patients to be worried. Um, but it also, the other thing it starts to get into on some level is just like the economics of healthcare. I mean, is this the most efficient structure going forward? And if it's not, what does that mean for like what all of us pay for our premiums and things like that? But in terms of like the other thing I really should point out just on the patients, like one of the big concerns in the background in all of this has been that, with this instability, that, a bunch of doctors might leave. A
Right.
lot of physicians over at the university are like, top of the field, and they could go elsewhere if they, thought, this isn't going to work out. So, and again, we haven't seen a ton of that. We've seen a few examples of that, but and some of that may yet still play out. But for the moment, I think that's another kind of big thing to watch going forward is like what happens to the doctors and do they stick around?
Well, and Fairview really didn't want to lose those top-notch doctors, from what I understand.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why that partnership was maybe so valuable to them.
Yeah.
What happens to the physical properties and the actual facilities? I mean, who owns them?
Yeah, so Fairview owns them by and large. And so Fairview has said they're going to invest $1 billion over 10 years to improve facilities. Now, in a way, they own the buildings, so that if you own a house, right, you invest in your house, so in some ways that's not news, but I mean, but it is an important commitment in this context because there have been concerns over at the university, concerns that Fairview disputes, but concerns that Fairview maybe wasn't investing enough in that hospital over in Minneapolis. It's kind of a long back and forth with that, but there's going to be more investment over there. And so in that sense, I mean, that's something that patients can maybe look forward to. There's talk of, a new tower. I don't know exactly what that is. Usually a tower is sort of like an expansion of a hospital. So there might be a new tower over on the East Bay campus, which if you've ever been there, of course, is a really crowded uh, bit of property. So I don't know precisely how that could happen, but that's something to be watching too. But those are that's really the big thing about the buildings.
Yeah, and this might be too in the weeds, but I did also see in your reporting that the university will get less guaranteed money.
Right. Yep. And that goes back to the bit about, the the structure. Hey, there are a lot of pieces to it. The easiest bit of money to talk about is like how much is the guaranteed funding, and so the guaranteed funding goes down. The new agreement, like the old, has like a variable component, and that gets into the performance of the health system, and that's where it's uncertain. There are also some responsibilities about certain clinics that are shifting to Fairview that they've been kind of money losing clinics. So that kind of helps out the university. But in terms of like doing the math, it makes it all a little complicated to say like, this was the deal in the past and here's the deal going forward. I keep trying to do that, but I can't give you an easy answer on that.
No, well, Chris, we sure appreciate you. Chris Snowbeck with the Star Tribune. You've covered healthcare here in the Twin Cities for years. You've covered it in other cities before that. So we sure appreciate you because it is a complicated matter that's been going on for years. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.